Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you. Good job. All right, good job. You know that awkward moment where you're sitting at the table and you go, gosh, I don't want that dessert. I want that dessert. Anybody have that? Yeah, all right. Thank you. Hey, Robert, sir, you stood up for the Air Force song? I mean, you're Army Air Corps, right?
Army Air Corps.
Okay, all right. Well, you were in both. All right. We will allow that then. Yeah, you have to. Everybody, please keep eating. If I don't see your face when I'm talking, I'll understand that you're actually consuming Class 1 and replenishing your supplies. It's okay. Yeah. So my title is kind of. I'm still getting used to it, even though it's 2.5 years. Associate Vice Chancellor, Leadership Development, Veterans Affairs. 2 hats at the University of Texas System. I work for a fantastic retired 4-star Navy SEAL named Bill McCraven. And every day he created the job I'm in because he firmly believes that leaders of character will have a positive influence on society. And he wanted someone to come in and work 3 things. Build a curriculum for the 221,000 students in the University of Texas System, undergrad, graduate, and professional degree. We've got 8 universities and 6 academic medical centers. So curriculum for students that would leave every UT System product with some knowledge, skill, and ability and leadership, whether they lead or not, but they might have the propensity to serve society. Second thing you wanted me to do is say, hey, look, every, and all of you, the folks I've met here today, you all know this, every good organization reinvests time and money into its own people. And so he said, I want every employee of the University of Texas System to be subjected, by the way, there's 100,000 of them, to be subjected to a leader development program. So I'm doing those 2 things. And then in his vision is he'd like a brick and mortar leadership and human performance institute, branded UT System, to go somewhere in the state of Texas. And so those are the 3 things that I'm charged to do. But I'm kind of, okay, for the Army folks here, you know the jobs you give the chemical officer? You know, hey, combined federal campaign, why don't you take that? Hey, tax assistance, why don't you take that too? I'm the chemical officer for the University of Texas System. But some of those are wonderful duties. I was there for 30 days. I signed on. I hung up the uniform in 2014, signed on in May of 15. Became a state employee, which is very interesting. It's just like the Army, by the way, everybody. Financial disclosure, every email can be put in the newspaper, and you have to do your analysis. So, anyway, he walked in and he said, I need you to do a strategic assessment of the University of Texas System. So I from June to November of 15, I did a deep dive on the state of Texas and the state of public education in general. As I thought about today, I thought, gosh, I just refreshed that data. Maybe I should tell you all about the state of education and health in Texas. And, I'm also a certified, I'm going to use a civilian term for this, the military has a different term, a certified executive coach for general officers. And last week I spent the entire week in Washington, D.C. with the most newly minted brigadier generals in the United States Army, active, guard, and reserve. And I heard the Chief Staff of the Army, the Acting Secretary of the Army, the Vice Chief Staff of the Army, the Sergeant Major of the Army. I heard all famous people and some think tank folks talking about North Korea and stuff. I thought, hey, maybe I can talk to you about that. But I thought, as I looked at, John King sent me John and Rick sent me the audience list and who you are. Looking at the wonderful mix of uniforms, the wonderful retirees I know are here, and I thought I'd bore you with that kind of stuff. So I'm going to tell you a story. I come to you today from the world of higher education, and I got to level with you. After 35 years in uniform, I was a little concerned as I settled into the hill country. Our first landing point was Wimberley. There's a sleepy little town. I was concerned if I could ever find a second calling like the one I had as a soldier. And amazingly enough, I did. I'm serious now, I discovered higher education is a calling too. And there's a sense of selfless service and no small amount of motivational energy when you know you have an impact on the rising generations of Americans. So my message today is going to be in the form of a story, a moment from my memory bank that stuck with me. And I hope you don't mind storytelling, but I treasure this memory up as I thought about all the powerful veterans and caring citizens and currently serving personnel in the room. It's a story with a message. So though I transitioned in September 14, like I said, I want to take you back to 2005. I was a brigadier general. I was returning home from one of my tours in Iraq because the Air Force was incredibly busy at that time. Actually, they were always busy. Rotating troops out of the combat zone was done by a contract airliner. Kuwait is the hub for that contract airliner. And one of the entry points for my fellow service personnel and I is Baltimore Washington International Airport. So the way it works is military aircraft, usually a C-130, my favorite airplane, a C-130 out of Baghdad, land in Kuwait, wait, and then get on something that looks like something you would fly from Houston Hobby to Dulles. So you wait for the contract air, and then you cross land and ocean and arrive in Baltimore. And I'm telling you all this for context. The reason my story begins with me walking out of the international in-processing side to my next gate for the final leg home because I was still in my combat uniform, and let's say I was hygienically challenged. So I moved through the familiar civilian forces Baltimore Washington Airport this early morning. Folks called out to me, "Thank you for your service," as they passed by me, and some of them even stopped me to shake my hand. Not very many, mind you, but about the fifth time, I put my head down and picked up the pace of my step. I was feeling a mix of embarrassment and sort of a I am not worthy of this attention kind of embarrassment. And then cruising past sights and smells, you know, the ubiquitous pretzel smell and barbecue and all kinds of great stuff. I thought silently to myself, and you got to understand, please, I was really tired, was kind of beat. I thought silently to myself, you know, folks, I appreciate all the attention, but I've been doing this for 26 years now, and you've never said anything to me or my wife until now. And just as I was having that somewhat self-centered thought, I arrived at my gate for that little puddle jumper prop plane that would take me to my home, our quarters, which were at that time in Southern Virginia. I looked around for a seat. The gate was packed. And the only spot open was next to a slight elderly fellow who was staring out the giant airport window. And he had on a blue baseball cap. You know the kind some veterans wear? Might be one or two in the room today. Had writing on it. Had a little embroidered ship. Old Navy guy, I thought to myself. Get ready to take some football grit. So I came close to him, pointed at the seat, and said quietly, "Sir, okay if I sit here?" He turned and looked up at me in my wrinkled combat uniform. He had no clue what I was, except the U.S. Army name tape over my heart. And he said, "Sure, go ahead, soldier." And then I saw it. The words and symbols on his cap came into focus. There was a C and an A and a dash and the number 35. CA, I knew, was a hull designation for cruiser, armored, which means a warship, a heavy cruiser of World War II vintage. And the ship's number was 35. I don't know the numbers of the ships and what their names were, but there was an embroidered arch over the embroidered image of a warship that had the ship's name. And CA-35 was the Uss Indianapolis. And I stopped dead. As my limited knowledge of military history came flooding back, I thought, is it possible I am going to sit next to one of the only 316 survivors of the 1,200-man crew of the last ship sunk in World War II Pacific? USS Indianapolis, the ship that delivered the first atomic bomb to the island airfield from which we launched that war-ending attack. Never mind that the Indy, as she was called, was Admiral Spruce's flagship, heavy cruiser, fought all across the Pacific. I think it had 10 battle stars, was best known for secretly delivering the atomic bomb, and then departing under radio silence to return to the fleet. A lone ship making a round trip clouded in secrecy. I remember reading how it was hit by a torpedo and sank in 12 minutes, leaving 900 survivors bobbing in the water. But because of beyond tragic errors of omission, no one knew she went down. And for 3.5 days, 900 Americans treading water slowly became 316. Dehydration, exposure, dementia, and shark attacks took the rest. So my mind's racing at BWI, here, looking at the open sea. Now I'm thinking all this as I set my bag down slowly, and so I look at him and I said, "Were you on the Indianapolis?" Thinking it might be a family member's captain. He smiled and said, "Yeah. I joined her at Mare Island in '43, and I served on her the rest of the war." And he smiled and said, "Well, the rest of my war anyway." And I assumed he meant his war ended with the sinking, and I felt a little uncomfortable. So we just started talking like a couple of veterans do. Now all the veterans present here know that the profession of arms has its own language, and no matter when or where you served, you end up with a great conversation. You end up in a great conversation with another veteran. We talk about life in the service then and now, differences between the Navy and the Army, who's smarter, better, stronger, has it tougher, soldier or sailor, you know, a little trash talking. Even though our service was separated by more than 60 years. And then I finally got around to asking him about those 84 hours in the water. And he just looked down and said, "It was bad. It was very, very bad. I lost so many friends." And then he looked out the window. And we were quiet for a while. During this quiet moment, I looked around the bustling airport and the folks sitting around us, young and old. A couple of happy college-age folks a couple of college-age folks directly across from us were dressed in what looked like pajamas. They were carrying giant pillows, so maybe they were pajamas. They had wires coming from their ears. The wires were attached to mobile devices as they stayed in their virtually delivered, well-entertained world. Close by at the ticket counter, a man was complaining loudly to the airline ticket agent about how much he paid for a first-class ticket, how many miles he had, and how he expected an airplane to be on time. And he didn't care that there was bad weather in Chicago. By God, just get another plane. Amazing. This is all true, by the way. A woman behind us was talking on her phone. It was 2005. It was a flip phone. A woman behind me was talking on her phone loudly, so we all heard about her life and her opinions about everything. An energetic 4-year-old was doing wind sprints between the rows of seats, screeching happily and every now and then knocking over a waiting passenger's carry-on. And taking all that in, well, I got a little annoyed. It had been about 17 hours of flying for me so far. Only 30 hours before, I was armed and in full body armor rolling down the streets of Baghdad. I had not slept much. And right then and there, I wanted to stand up on my chair and in my best command voice call everyone together and chew them out for their apathy. And recognize this man, this elderly American veteran who almost 60 years ago to that day, I discovered, survived unspeakable horror and hardship. So these people at Gate 32C, at the far end of a huge airport, so they could have this moment. Have a safe trip home. Have the freedom to complain without the worry of arrest. So they could live in a land of plenty with a vibrant economy where you can buy all kinds of electronic devices to plug into your ears. And where there's more than one airline, amazingly enough. This slow-moving, shuffling in aches and pains old man was one of the reasons they could have enough of a belief in a safe and secure future that they wanted to raise screeching 4-year-olds. I looked over at my new Navy friend, and then back at our little slice of the American public that day. And I thought to myself, you people have no idea who is sitting among you. And then, I thought about my own weak moment right before I saw and read his blue baseball cap. The one I told you about, where I thought to myself, hey, you're just now noticing us in uniform? And I felt very small. I realized that this sailor and veterans just like him, just like you veterans in the room today, were around me every day, and I hadn't said a word to them either. And it was driven home to me once again about the role of the American soldier, sailor, airman, marine, and coast guardman. It's called service for a reason. We all choose to place our country, our families, and the well-being and future of both above ourselves. It is service, and we are servants. And we have no desire for awards or recognition. Our reward is simply the honor of having served. In the airport that day, my anger subsided, and I was overcome with a feeling of gratitude and pride. I felt so fortunate to have met and shared this moment with my elderly Navy buddy. We sat there next to each other silently. Old warrior, him. Middle-aged warrior, me. Basking in the glow of our handiwork. Happy, out-of-control children, incredibly detached young people, and momentarily unfeeling and inconsiderate adults, but all of them free Americans. I had the honor of speaking at a veterans function at UT Arlington recently, and I was trying to describe to others the value our veteran students bring to the classroom. And I mentioned a number of things, only one of which I'll mention here today, because it applies to all of you veterans here. Military service changes you. And regardless of your personality traits upon arrival at basic training or boot camp, the one trait that is so much more highly developed throughout your service is that great indicator of maturity, gratitude. In the uniformed service, you develop a supreme sense of gratitude. In fact, for little, simple things. Things like good weather, safely taking off in an aircraft, and safely landing in it. No matter how bumpy or uncomfortable that trip might be. You're grateful for ice. My goodness, ice. Ice in any form. Block, cube, crushed. I digress. I've served in some hot places. I'm sorry. You're also grateful, believe it or not, for electricity, air conditioning, reliable indoor plumbing, and a limitless supply of toilet paper. Little things like that you never again take for granted. But more importantly, ladies and gentlemen, you're shaken awake intellectually in the service by being thrust overseas and immersed among the less fortunate. You live among those in abject poverty, victims of war, victims of civil war. You see the product of man's hijacking of religion in the pursuit of power and influence. You witness senseless violence. You administer discriminating violence yourself. And processing all that is the intellectual awakening that causes us to be so grateful for the big things. Things we took for granted when we woke up every day in the United States. Things like self-determination, freedom of choice, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, a representative government with rule of law, not rule by law, and the ability to pursue a dream the way we want to. A dream that might come true, primarily because we're lucky to be Americans. And we determine, we soldiers, sailors, airmen, marines, and coast guardsmen, we determine, we don't determine, it's actually incredibly, indelibly etched in our hearts, that those things are in fact worth fighting for. So Tuesday this week, and some events happen, current events cause this sense of gratitude to spike. Tuesday this week was another election day, not the national level, but lots of action at state and local levels across this country, and believe it or not, that causes my sense of gratitude to spike. Days like that cause me to give thanks I live in a representative democracy, a republic as imperfect as it might be, where those who wield the deadly power, the United States Armed Forces, swear their allegiance to a body of ideals, not a person, not a symbol, but the Constitution of the United States. And no matter what happens after there's an election, a peaceful transition of power is guaranteed, primarily because of that special and unique allegiance our veterans have to the Constitution. And they have passed that legacy on to those in uniform in this room today, and all their brothers and sisters worldwide. So Houston Rotary teammates, jumping back to my airport waiting area story, You just never know who's sitting next to you. In line at the store, in the movie theater, riding the elevator with you in the Chase Tower at the Bank of America Plaza. It's our habit to pay strangers no mind, but they could be members of the World War II, Korea, Cold War, Vietnam, Grenada, Panama, Somalia, Balkans, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, West Africa, or Horn of Africa, or other experience. And one of your fellow Americans who chose to put a portion of their lives on hold, and through selflessness, perseverance, their commitment to freedom, allow all of us to enjoy the freedoms we do today. So here today and this week we pay attention to them and honor them. And I know we can all depart here today with a sense of gratitude for all we have and commit to living lives worthy of all we've been given. Thank you for your patience with me today. It's been an honor to be your speaker.